To get started with categories then, let's first of all go ahead and make a model. We're going to put this inside of the models directory that we created earlier. And let's create a migration alongside of this and build this out now. So let's head over to create categories table and let's fill in the information that we might need for each of the categories that are going to appear in the head of our application. So the first thing is of course going to be a name, and we could make this unique. Let's leave that out for now just in case you do have a category that's the same name. And that's pretty much all we're going to have, a category name and a category slug. So let's also go ahead and create this slug. Now the slug does need to be unique because of course we can't have a page with the same slug, that's not going to work. And the other thing that we're going to introduce here is a parent ID because we're going to have multi-level categories. So let's go ahead and make this unsigned and let's make this an index, and let's also make this nullable as well so we don't have to have a parent ID for each category. So if we go and just go ahead and migrate this, we can actually add a foreign key constraint here. So let's say foreign parent ID references ID on categories. What that will do is it will mean that parent ID must exist inside of this table. So let's go ahead and run PHP Artisan migrate to create that out. And let's go over to the database and just take a look at creating a test category in here. So let's say category 1, put the slug in there, the parent ID is nullable, and you can get rid of the created at and updated at dates inside of your model if you prefer. So that's pretty much our first category. Now if we just open up our category model, what we want inside of here are the children. So let's go and create our a children method, and let's go ahead and say that this has many categories, and we'll say parent ID as the foreign key and ID as the local key. That means that we can grab the children from these categories. So let's just go and say child, change that over and set the parent ID to 1. So that's what will happen if you create categories. So this will be at the top level, and then on the client, if you are building the client along, we'll be able to hover over this and see the child category. Now the only problem at the moment is if we just head over to root and API, let's just test this out really quickly by building this out, and we'll just create a really simple root here to test this. If we grab our categories like so, and we die dump on categories, of course what we're going to end up with are 2 categories, and we don't want that. We only want to grab the children when we need them. We don't want these to show in the actual categories top level list. So let's go ahead and send this request across and check this preview out, and sure enough we have 2 items inside of here. So the first thing that we really need is a scope which will allow us to only grab the parents of this category. So we can really easily do this by just introducing a scope inside of here. So let's go and say create a scope in here called parents, and into this we'll receive a builder instance. So let's go ahead and type hint that, pull that into here, that'll be eloquent builder, and let's go ahead and say builder where null parent ID. So by grabbing the parents, we know that the parent ID being null is a top level. So now that we've introduced that scope and we've used it over here, what we should now see is just 1 item. You can see we've just got an array of 1 item inside of here. So that's just a really quick way to grab that. And then of course what we can do is when we iterate over the categories in the next part, when we look at actually outputting these on the page, we'll actually be able to then grab all of the children of them categories, and you can make this as many levels deep as you like. Now the other thing is orderable categories. So really what we need is the ability to order these. So for example, if we have 1 and 2, let's just delete this child for now. We're writing tests at the end to check this anyway. So we have 1 and 2 like that. What we want to do is say, well, 1 should appear as the first category and 2 should appear as the second category. So if we just come over and create a fresh migration to deal with this, so let's make a migration, add order to categories table, and we go ahead and specify the table in here that we want to use. And let's go ahead and open this up. So add order to categories table. This is just a typical pattern I use. So we have an integer inside of here, and that is the order. It doesn't have to be unsigned. It can be less than 0 if you want. So So let's go ahead and say table drop column down here for the order. And essentially what this will allow us to do, if we just go ahead and migrate this change now, in fact, that should be nullable. So let's go ahead and make this nullable. We shouldn't need an order in there. Let's rerun this. And let's open this up and say, well, this comes first and this comes second. So we just give a kind of numbered ascending order to this. And what that means is we can then order them by that order. So we can say something like ordered get. So, or we can just put the order by clause in here if we want to. So let's just copy this scope over and let's call this ordered. And let's go and say order by order. And we might want to change the direction around, so we can add in a direction in here that we can override. We want it by default to be ascending, so I'm just going to add in the default there, and let's go ahead and order that by the direction. So now what we can do, if we just go ahead and send this request over in Postman again, of course we get 1 first and we get 2 second, just inside of here. Now if I was to go and switch 2 and 1 over like that, then sure enough, what you'd imagine is we get 2 first and 1 next. So it just allows you to control that in a really simple way by including the order in there in the database. So let's just go ahead and finish up by setting the fillable columns in here, and then we'll go ahead and write some tests out for this in just a second. So of course the name is the only fillable column. You could also fill the order as well. This just depends if you are building some kind of admin panel to create things. Okay, so now that we've done this, that is it. If you want to follow along the tests, we're now going to be writing some very simple unit tests to check that all of this works in case we change anything and refactor anything a little bit later on. So to create the test for this then, let's go ahead and run PHP Artisan make test, and let's think about the structure of this. So what I tend to do is keep the structure of the tests similar to the structure of my application. You don't need to do this, but it just really helps. So we're of course creating a unit test inside of here, and inside of unit we probably have a folder called models. So let's create a models, let's create a categories folder, and then say category test. So this is just going to be our standard category test, and let's go ahead and pass in the unit flag to create out a unit test inside of this directory. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to test for is test it has many children. So test it has many children, that's pretty important. And how are we going to do this? Well, inside of unit tests, typically we don't hit the database, but I actually don't mind doing this. It doesn't really slow things down too much. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a model factory for this, which will allow me to actually create a category in the database, then go ahead and save another category to that, and then check that when we get that child back, it is an instance of category. So let's go over to the command line and run PHP Artisan make factory, and let's create out our category factory, our first factory in here, and let's go over to our database folder, over to factories, and we'll come over to category factory. So let's go and say category class, pull the namespace in for this, and really all we need in here is a name. So let's use faker, and we'll say unique, and let's just say name. So we don't really need to do too much in here to get this working, and that just needs to be a property. Okay, so now if we come over to our category test, the first thing to do is just build out the category. So let's go and create that category with our factory. So we'll say category class, and we just need one of these. So let's just create this out. And then what we want to do is save another category to the child relationship. So we're going to go ahead and say category, children, save, and into this we're going to save another category. So let's go ahead and grab this, pop that inside of there, and then we want to assert that the first category that we get back, now this is at the same time, and I'll explain this in just a second, at the same time we're checking that we can save children, because of course this will fail if not, and we're also checking that this is a collection of things as well, because now what we can say is category children first. That will assume it's a collection. What you can also do is say assert instance of collection, and then say category children if you like, but I tend to like just keeping these as simple as possible and only creating one assertion within each test. So let's pull the namespace in for the category just here, and let's go ahead and see if this works. So let's run PHP unit, and it looks like we've got a null value in slug, of course. So if we come over to our category factory, let's create a slug out here, which is str slug, and let's assign this name at the same time so we can just really conveniently pop that in there. Okay, great. So let's come over to our category model. Of course, we also need slug to be fillable. For your tests, it doesn't matter that these are fillable because it will just force create these. So you don't need to add them in for your tests. So let's run PHP unit, and sure enough, that is our first passing test. We know that a category can have many children. So the next test is going to be that it can fetch only parents if we need it to. That's that scope that we introduced earlier. So what I'm going to do is just copy and paste this down, and we are going to say test it can fetch only parents. Really, really important for when we build out the endpoint for this in the next part. So we go ahead and create a category. We save another category to this, and we want to do something like assert equals 1. And we want to say category parents count. You can do this other ways as well. You can say assert count on the parents if you prefer. It really doesn't matter how you do this. So let's go ahead and run this, and sure enough, we get 2 tests and 2 assertions now passing. Now the next test, of course, is checking that we can order this by a numbered order. So let's again just copy this and paste this down here. So test it can, or it is would be better reading. So orderable by a numbered order. So this is slightly different. What we need to do is create a category inside of here, specifically given the order. So the first category that I'm going to create is going to have an order of 2, and the second category I create, so I'm going to call this another category, should have an order of 1. So by default, something will be ordered by, I think it's the primary key. So if we create this one first, that's going to have a lower primary key, and typically we would see this one first. But essentially what we can now do is say assert equals another category name, and we're going to check that that equals category ordered first name. So the first thing that we pull out should be the thing with the order of 1, and we can check the name, we can check the slug, it doesn't really matter, or we can just check the ID of the item that's been created. So let's go ahead and run our tests, and sure enough, we get green again. Perfect. Okay, so now that we've done that, maybe time for a little bit of refactoring. So let's come over to our category model. If we think about it, there may be other things in our application that we also want to order, and there might be other things as well that we might want to have parents as long as we keep the same kind of pattern going here, having a parent ID and an order, we can actually extract these out to traits just to make these a little bit more reusable. You don't really have to do this at this point, but I like to do this now just so it's a little bit quicker as we get into things. So inside of our models directory, let's create a traits folder, and let's move over the parents one first. So let's create a has children traits, and let's go ahead and build this out. So has children, let's pull the namespace in for that, and let's basically just copy this over. So that's the scope that we use to grab only the parents. And let's bring the builder in here, and let's get rid of the builder. Well, we can't really at the moment because we have to move this out. But let's go ahead and say use has children. So much nicer. We know that this thing has children, and we know that that includes only grabbing the parents if we need them. So let's go ahead and run our tests, and sure enough we get green. So a successful refactor of that. Let's do the same thing for ordered, same pattern we just followed through, and we're going to call this is orderable.php. And let's go ahead and create this trait out as well, is orderable. And we're just going to do exactly the same thing. So we're just going to go ahead and grab this scope, pull that over to here, pull the builder in, and we'll come over to category, get rid of builder because we don't need that namespace import in there anymore. And we're going to say is orderable and pull that in. Let's go ahead and run PHP unit, and sure enough, that now has passing tests. Now we can't really pull children over to the has children because this specifically relates to a model, so we're going to leave that one in there, but at least we've tidied up our model, and we now, if we have anything else in our application that has children or is orderable, we can just have all of that functionality shared between our models. So there we go. That is our category basics done. Let's move over to the next part and look at actually building out the endpoint to list categories so we can eventually get these into our navigation on the client.